Hey everyone, I'm Liz, and today I'll be showing you how I made this Star Wars inspired BB-8 droid amigurumi. As you can see, my droid has a moving headpiece that can rotate all the way around, and I'll show you how to get that look in this tutorial. Some things you're going to need for this tutorial are a crochet hook. I'll be using a size E, a pair of scissors to cut off your yarn. I'll be using a bobby pin to mark my stitches. You could use pins to make sure all of your parts are in the right places before sewing. You'll need a couple of black safety eyes. One will be 6mm and the other 12mm. You'll need acrylic fiber fill to stuff your doll, and you'll need a yarn needle to sew all the pieces together and to sew in your ends. For the rotating piece, I used a thin wooden dowel stick and some wooden beads with a slightly smaller hole than my dowel. I just used what I had on hand. You could use a bead that fits the dowel more loosely, but you'll have to glue the pieces together in that case. You're going to need yarn. I recommend using Red Heart Super Saver yarn, but you can use any Aran weight yarn you like. I'll be using Snow White, Grey Heather, and Pumpkin, all from Red Heart brand. First, I'm going to show you how to make the head. I'm going to begin with my white yarn. I'm going to create a double magic circle by looping my yarn around my fingers twice. Then I'm going to take my hook, and in the middle of my two loops, I'm going to pull up a loop. Then I'm going to chain 2. And that is going to count as my first stitch of the row. And on my circle, I want to have a total of 8 single crochets, so I'm going to single crochet 7 more times into my circle. So I've gotten to the end of 7 stitches of single crochet. Now I'm going to close my magic circle. First I'm going to pull on the tail a little bit until I have one smaller loop and one larger loop. Then I'm going to pull on that smaller loop from the side that's closest to the tail until the other loop closes completely. Then I'm just going to pull on the tail until the remaining loop closes. And now I have my magic circle. Next I'm going to find that chain that I made in the last row, the one that counted as the first stitch. And into that chain I'm going to single crochet. Then before I continue, I'm going to mark that as the first stitch of my row using my bobby pin. Then I'm going to single crochet again into the same stitch, and that's going to be my first increase. So I'm going to increase every stitch of this row until I get back to my stitch marker. So I've gotten back to my stitch marker. Now I'm going to remove it. Then I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch of the row. Then I'm going to put my stitch marker into that slip stitch. And cut off my yarn. And I'm just going to pull my tail toward the back of the work. Next I'm going to use my gray yarn. I'm going to pull up a loop in the first stitch of the row, but I'm going to go only in the back loop. So I'm going to leave this front loop out so there will be a line dividing the two colors. So pull up a loop. Now I'm going to chain 1. And I'm going to mark that chain as the first stitch. Then I'm going to do a row of slip stitches in the back loops all the way around. Now I've gotten all the way around, so now I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch of my row. And cut off my yarn. And once again, mark that first stitch. And I'm going to pull my tail to the back of my work. Next, I'm going to use white again. I'm going to pull up a loop in the first stitch of the row in the back loop again. Then I'm going to chain 2. And mark that chain as the first stitch of my row. Then I'm going to single crochet in the back loops all the way around, and this time I'm going to increase every second stitch. So into the next stitch I'm going to single crochet 2 times. And I'm going to continue to increase every second stitch all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. Now here at the end of the row, I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch of my row and mark that as my first stitch. Then I'm going to cut off my yarn and pull the tail to the back of my work. Now I'm going to use orange. So pull up a loop at the first stitch of the row in the back loop, and chain 1. Mark that as the first stitch. Then I'm going to slip stitch in the back loops all the way around until I get to the end of the row. So now at the end of the row, I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch, mark my first stitch, and cut off my yarn. Next, I'm going to use white. Pull up a loop at the first stitch of the row in the back loop again. Chain 2, and mark that as the first stitch. Then I'm going to single crochet 11 more into the back loops. Now I've finished my 11th stitch, so I'm going to increase the next 2 stitches using half double crochet. And I'm going to crochet over both of the orange loops and the white loop from the previous rows. So to half double crochet, I'm going to yarn over my hook, pull up a loop over those orange and white loops, then pull through all 3. I'm going to do that again in the same spot, yarn over, and pull through all 3. Then I'm going to do the same thing in the next stitch. Now this white part is joined to this other white part at the top. So now to finish the row, I'm just going to single crochet until the end of the row, and I'm going to continue working in those back loops until I get back to my stitch marker. So as you can see, I've finished this row and gotten back to my stitch marker. And this white part from the previous row is going to be where I put the larger eye. So now I'm just going to single crochet into both loops again for 2 more rows. And I'm going to keep marking my stitches for each row. So I've gotten to the end of my second row of single crochet, and before I finish this last stitch, I'm actually going to change colors to my orange yarn. So I've pulled up a loop, and now I'm going to take my orange yarn and pull through a loop to finish that stitch. Now I'm going to remove my stitch marker, and I'm going to single crochet using orange. Then I'm going to mark my first stitch, and I'm going to single crochet 3 more using orange. And on that 4th orange stitch, I'm going to leave it open and switch colors back to white. And I'm going to do 1 white stitch, pull up a loop and leave it open, and change back to orange. Then do 1 stitch of orange, leave it open, switch back to white, and do 1 white stitch, and again change colors back to orange. I'm going to do 3 stitches of orange, switch back to white, do 1 stitch of white, switch back to orange, do 1 stitch of orange, switch back to white, do 4 stitches of white, and on that 4th stitch I'm going to leave it open and switch back to orange. And I'm going to do 1 orange stitch, and then switch to white, and do 1 white stitch, change colors back to orange, and do 3 orange stitches. Then on that 3rd orange stitch, change back to white, and do 1 white stitch, then change colors back to orange, and do 4 stitches of orange. And this 4th stitch of orange is the last stitch of the row, so I'm actually going to change colors again back to white for this last stitch. And then I'm going to slip stitch to the 1st stitch of my row, and I'm going to mark that as the 1st stitch, then cut off my yarn. Next I'm going to use my gray yarn. I'm going to pull up a loop in the back loop in that 1st stitch of the row, and chain 1, and I'm going to mark that as my 1st stitch. Then I'm going to slip stitch in the back loops all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. So I'm at the end of the row, so I'm going to slip stitch to my 1st stitch, mark my 1st stitch, and cut off my yarn. and I'm going to pull my tail to the back of the work. And now I'm going to add the eyes. So I'm going to take my bigger eye and I'm going to place it in this front area here where I added those white stitches. And the other one I'm going to add slightly below and to the side here. And now I need to put the plastic washer on the back. It's a little tough to get the washer all the way down to the fabric, so to make it easier, I have this set of sockets here. I'm just going to take the smallest one, and I'm going to place the plastic washer over the back of the screw, push it down a little bit until it's snapped onto the end of the screw, then I'm going to place the socket over the washer and use a hammer to tap it until the plastic is against the fabric. And I'm going to do the same thing with my smaller eye. And now the eyes are attached. So now I'm going to add fiber fill to the inside of the head. Okay, now I'm going to use white. I'm going to pull up a loop in the back loop of the first stitch. Chain 2, and mark that as the first stitch. Then I'm going to single crochet into the back loops all the way around, but this time I'm going to decrease every second stitch. So this chain counts as my first stitch, so to decrease the next one, I'm going to pull up a loop, then pull up another loop in the next stitch, and crochet together. And I'm going to continue to decrease every second stitch all the way around. So single crochet the next stitch, then pull up a loop in the next two, and crochet together. So I've gotten to the end of my row, and now I'm going to work in both loops again. I'm going to do my first stitch, but this time I'm going to decrease every stitch of the row. So pull up a loop in the next two stitches, and crochet together. And I'm going to do that for every stitch of this row. And now I'm done with this row, so I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch of the row, and cut off my yarn. And I'm going to leave a long tail to attach the head to the body later.